Hello. The topic of this video is campaigns, elections, and voting. This is covered in Chapter 8 in your book, so please make sure you've read the chapter carefully before you do any other work for the week. But I want to talk a little bit about this topic and why it's important. So, American campaigns occur primarily at the state level. Even in a presidential election, when we're choosing the leader of the country, the election process really occurs at the state level. And that's because under the U.S. Constitution, states are responsible for running elections. So the way it works is that the date for a federal election, and federal elections are the ones that occur for U.S. President, U.S. Senate, and U.S. House. The date for the federal election is set by law. And the terms of members of Congress as well as the president are set in the U.S. Constitution. So House members serve 2-year terms, senators serve 6-year terms, and presidents serve 4-year terms. And so in the early 19th century, the Congress decided that federal elections should take place in November on a Tuesday, and a lot of it had to do with kind of what people were involved with in terms of their occupations at the time and the amount of time it took to get to polling places and so forth. So the first Tuesday following the first Monday of November has been established for many years as the federal election date. Now, states can have elections for their offices whenever they want, but generally state elections follow the federal pattern as well, so that they're also on a Tuesday. And in fact, in most states, the statewide elections occur at the same time as federal elections. In Michigan, for example, our state elections occur in what we would call the midterm year, the year that's midway into a president's term. So, for example, 2018 was a statewide election. Michigan 2022 will be a statewide election, but that is determined at the state level. When it comes to the election process, a couple of things that I think are important. One is that our campaigns in this country are centered on candidates. We have what we call candidate-centered campaigns. As important as parties are in our political system, and they are the two major parties are very important for a number of reasons that are discussed in the previous chapter, Chapter 7. The reality is that parties don't really determine who their candidates are going to be. That decision is made by the voters. Voters in the United States choose their candidates for the party in primary elections. So a primary election takes place early in the election year, and it allows the members of that party to decide who their nominee will be for each office on the ballot. This is not just for presidential elections. A lot of times people associate primaries with the presidential election, but it actually applies to most offices that are on the ballot. In a partisan primary process, well, first of all, the reason we even have primaries, which most countries don't have or don't use, is because in the early 20th century there was a progressive movement in the United States. And the idea of the progressive movement was that it was necessary to reform our electoral system, not the Electoral College, but the system of how we do elections. And there was a lot of corruption, particularly at the local level, where big city machines, political party machines would develop, and they would reward supporters of the chosen of various candidates with jobs, or actually they would reward them with money actually to vote in the election, and people would get jobs with the city based on whether they supported the political party organization in the elections. That was a very corrupt system, and so early in the 20th century, so about 120 years ago or so, a number of places around the country decided to reform the political process, and they said one way to do that is to let the voters decide who's going to be the nominee of a party. So instead of allowing the party bosses to decide, or somebody in kind of the stereotypical smoke-filled room, now it would be left up to the voters. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that in the early 1900s, a lot of people were not able to vote. Women could not vote in most states. African Americans could not vote in most parts of the country. and there were other restrictions on voting. So that's one thing to always keep in mind. But regardless of all of that, the idea was to let the voters decide who the nominees would be. So that kind of began in the early 1900s, and there were kind of developed over time different types of primaries. So the authors of your book refer to the open primary, which is what we use in Michigan, where you do not have to be a registered member of the party to vote in the party's primary, but you do still have to vote for one party or the other party. You can't mix your votes between the parties in a primary. It's different for a general election, but in a primary, the idea is that you're deciding who's going to represent your party in the general election. So in states that use the open primary, they do require that you vote for one party or the other party. In some states, other states, there's a closed primary process where you actually have to register as a member of the party in order to vote in that party's primary. And you register by filling out a form. You don't have to pay dues to become a member, but you do have to declare yourself officially as a member of that party. You can always switch your registration, but it is a requirement in some states. Not in Michigan, we have the open primary, but a number of states use the closed primary process. So the basic idea is that the primaries are where the nominees are chosen, so whichever candidate wins a majority of the votes or the largest number of votes in that party's primary for a given office becomes the official nominee of the party. That applies for everything from the presidential election to U.S. House, U.S. Senate seats, and at the state level it applies to state legislative seats, and in Michigan we use primaries to determine who the candidates will be for governor and so forth. So the reason I say that the campaigns have become so candidate focused is because of the primaries. Because if you are someone who wants to run for a given office, you really have to convince the voters of your party first that you're the right person, and then if they vote for you, then you have to convince the elections more generally in the fall of the election year that you are the right candidate. And in order to do that, you have to sell yourself, and the way you sell yourself is by running ads either on television or online or in other venues, and it's very expensive. Particularly if you're running ads on television, it can become very expensive to do so. If it's a large state, or certainly if you're running for president, it's going to cost a lot of money. So candidates do have to sell themselves. They have to run ads on television. They have to do a lot to promote themselves. So that leads to the second thing I wanted to talk about, which is the importance of money in American politics. Because you have to raise a lot of money to run for office, it also means that you have to find the money somewhere, somehow. And if you're running for a federal office, U.S. House, U.S. Senate, or President, there are federal election law limits on where you can get your money. So as a candidate, you have to form a committee, and then the committee solicits contributions from individuals and other organizations. And there are set limits under federal law, and those limits are enforced by the Federal Elections Commission, the FEC, which is a bipartisan, meaning it's both Democrats and Republicans, a bipartisan commission that is appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and the members of that commission enforce all the federal election laws. The main restrictions are that individuals are limited in how much they can give to a single candidate within an election year. And then it also, the federal election laws that we currently have also authorize the creation of what are called political action committees, or PACs. Political action committees are the political fundraising arms of interest groups. They can also be formed by individuals who want to give out money, but they have to make sure that they are raising their money legally and accounting for where they're getting it, and there are limits on how much can be contributed to political action committees or PACs. That's all discussed in your reading. Now, all of that is still law today, but in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision in the case, what was known as the Citizens United case. It arose out of some things going on in the 2008 presidential campaign, and essentially what the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United was that political spending equals speech. that when you give money or you spend money politically, you're expressing an opinion. So money equals speech in American politics, according to the Supreme Court decision. Now that was a very controversial decision. It was decided by a 5-4 majority on the Supreme Court. Many people disagreed with it. Certainly, other people thought it was a good decision. But it really was very controversial because the question is, if you say that money equals speech, then what does that mean if you don't have a lot of money? Does that mean you're going to have less speech than somebody who has more money? But regardless of what someone thinks about the decision, it was reached. And since that time, this is going back to 2010, in the elections that have taken place since then, there have been large amounts of money that have been unleashed in American politics. Because what happened soon after that is super PACs were formed. A super PAC is a special kind of political action committee that is authorized under the Citizens United decision, which basically allows a very wealthy individual or corporation or organization to spend as much as they want on behalf of their favorite candidate. There are very few restrictions on where they get the money or how they spend it. The one limitation is they're not supposed to be coordinating with a given candidate. So, for example, if you had a super PAC that supported the Republican candidate, they're not supposed to be coordinating with him on that, on the campaign message, and the same for a super PAC that supports a Democratic candidate. But the reality is there's not much separation between the super PACs and the candidates they support, and it has opened up the floodgates in terms of money. While the candidates may be limited in where they get their money, super PACs are not, and it's contributed to $1 billion plus campaigns for president in recent years, as well as very expensive U.S. Senate and U.S. House races. One of the things about campaign ads that you see on television is that someone has to pay for them. If the candidate himself or herself is paid for the ad, then you will hear them say their name in the message. So they'll say, I am Joe Biden and I approve this message, or I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message. You know that their campaign paid for that ad. If it's paid for by a super PAC or a regular political action committee, then the organization name is stated in the commercial. But a lot of these are organizations that are only formed for one election and then they go away because there aren't a lot of limits on them. So people may not know, well, what is this organization? Well, it's a super PAC that formed because of the Citizens United decision. So again, Citizens United is not going away. Certainly the current Supreme Court majority of the court is very conservative and continues to agree with it. But it is a concern in American politics that there is so much money, because money can be a corrupting influence. And it's just something that people are trying to figure out, how do we ensure that campaigns do not become corrupt? And also how to try to prevent them from becoming more expensive. But it's not likely that's going to happen in the near future. So in any event, those are the things I wanted to talk about. Please make sure you read the information in Chapter 8 very carefully and contact me if you have any questions. All right? Take care.